the pipeline to nowhere. Tiger Woods once said that only 2 golfers in history ever truly owned their swing. One was Ben Hogan. The other, a man you've likely never heard of. He was a man who lived in the back of his car. A man who slept in sand traps because he was too shy to check into a hotel. He spoke in a stuttering, repetitive loop, wore mismatched clothes, and would rather hide in the woods than accept a trophy. They called him Pipeline Moe. They called him the Rain Man of golf. He was a man who could hit a golf ball onto a dime from 200 yards away, but couldn't look a stranger in the eye. To the elite world of professional golf, he was a circus act, a freak, a mistake. But as we sit here in April 2026, looking back at the wreckage of what could have been the greatest career in sports history, we have to ask, was Moe Norman a broken man who happened to be a genius? Or was he a genius who was broken by a world that didn't have a place for people like him? The boy in the snow. Before he was Moe, he was Murray. And before the world knew him for his swing, his life was almost cut short in a Kitchener snowbank. At 5 years old, Murray was sledding when he drifted under the wheels of a moving car. He was lucky to be alive. He walked home that day with a bruised cheek and a shattered sled, but his family never took him to a doctor. For the rest of his life, people wondered, did that impact change something inside his brain? Did it unlock the autistic-like genius that allowed him to see the world in numbers and angles? Or was the boy who emerged from that accident simply different? Growing up in a working-class suburb, Murray didn't fit the mold. He was a math prodigy who could calculate complex figures in seconds, but he struggled to understand the simplest social cues. He repeated his sentences twice. He moved too fast. He spoke too loud. And at home, the silence was even louder. His father, a furniture worker, didn't understand this strange, obsessive child. He didn't understand why his son wanted to spend every waking hour at a golf course instead of playing real sports like hockey or baseball. Moe once told a story that haunts his legacy. He said his father was so ashamed of his obsession that Moe wasn't allowed to bring his golf clubs inside the house. He had to hide them under the porch like a secret sin. While other kids were playing with friends, Moe was at Rockaway Golf Course, a solitary figure in the fading light. He wasn't just practicing, he was escaping. He would hit balls until his hands bled, and then he would wrap them in tape and hit 100 more. He never had a coach. He never took a lesson. He just stood in the dirt and listened to the sound of the ball. Moe Norman didn't find golf. He found a language. For a boy who couldn't communicate with his father, who was bullied by his classmates, and who felt like an alien in his own skin, the golf ball was the only thing that spoke back. It didn't judge him. It didn't laugh at his stutter. If he hit it perfectly, it went exactly where he told it to. He was building a masterpiece in the shadows of Ontario. He was becoming the most accurate ball striker the world would ever see. But the walls he was building to protect himself from the world were also becoming a cage. And very soon, the golden boy of Canadian amateur golf was going to step into the spotlight, only to find out that the world wasn't ready for a genius who didn't know how to say hello. The trapped swing. Between the ages of 18 and 20, Moe Norman did something that most golfers spend a lifetime failing to do. He stopped searching. While the rest of the world was obsessing over the secret to the golf swing, Moe found it in the dirt of Rockaway Golf Course. He called it trapping the swing. He had simplified the most complicated motion in sports into a single, unbreakable plane. To the naked eye, it looked bizarre, the wide stance, the stiff arms, the club head hovering inches behind the ball. But to Moe, it was math. It was a straight line in a world of curves. In 1955, the machine finally went to war. Moe entered the Canadian Amateur Championship and didn't just win. He dominated. He repeated the feat in 1956. By 26 years old, the caddy who used to hide his clubs under the porch was the king of Canadian golf. He wasn't just winning. He was playing a version of the game that no one had ever seen. He played so fast that he'd sometimes finish 18 holes in under 2 hours. He didn't line up putts. He didn't check the wind. He simply saw the line and he hit the ball. The master of the dimes. This is where the legend of Pipeline Moe was born. The stories from this era sound like tall tales, but they were documented by the best in the business. One day, During a tournament, Moe was told he couldn't reach a green because a creek crossed the fairway at 240 yards. Moe didn't lay up. He pulled his driver and intentionally bounced the ball off the bridge, over the water and onto the green. Why? Because he could. He would hit balls off the top of soda bottles. He would tell spectators exactly which limb of a tree he was going to hit from 100 yards away, and then he'd hit it 3 times in a row. He once hit 1,540 drives in a single day, and every single one of them stayed within a 30-yard wide corridor. At his peak, Moe Norman owned 33 course records. He shot 59 3 different times in competition. He didn't just hit fairways. He hit the same spot on the fairway so often that he would wear out a patch of grass for the players behind him. But it wasn't just about the accuracy. It was about the sound. Fellow pros like Sam Snead and Lee Trevino used to say that when Moe hit a ball, it sounded like a rifle shot. It was a pure strike that made other professionals stop what they were doing just to watch. The invitation to Augusta, the peak of Moe's amateur career, brought him to the one place every golfer dreams of, the Masters. In 1956, Moe arrived at Augusta as an invitee. This was his chance to show the world that the Canadian freak was the real deal. But Augusta wasn't a municipal course in Ontario. It was a cathedral of tradition, of etiquette, and of quiet. Moe was a man of noise. He talked to himself. He repeated his sentences. He wore bright, clashing colors. On the practice range, the other pros stopped to watch him hit his laser-straight drives. But in the clubhouse, the silence was deafening. He played well early on, shooting a 75 in the first round. But the pressure of the social side of the Masters was crushing him. He felt the stares. He heard the whispers about his clothes and his stutter. During a practice session, a legendary pro allegedly told Moe he was doing it all wrong and needed to change his grip. Moe, the man who had trapped the perfect swing, was devastated. His confidence, built on a foundation of solitary practice, shattered in the Georgia sun. He withdrew from the tournament after the second round and drove his car all the way back to Canada in one sitting. He had touched the sun, and it had burned him. He would turn professional in 1957, winning 17 of his first 21 tournaments. He was, by every statistical measure, the best ball striker on the planet. But the world was beginning to realize that Moe Norman's greatest challenge wasn't the course. It was the people on it. He was entering his prime as an athlete, but he was also entering a battle for his own dignity. A battle he wasn't sure he could win. The wall of silence. In 1959, Moe Norman was one of the best golfers on the planet. He had just finished fourth at the Greater New Orleans Open, proving he could compete with the giants of the PGA Tour. He should have been celebrating. He should have been the next big thing. Instead, he was running away. Professional golf in the 1950s was a fraternity of gentlemen. It was a world of polished shoes, perfect etiquette, and unwritten rules. And Moe Norman, with his mismatched socks, his high-pitched stutter, and his habit of drinking 6 Cokes in a single round, was an intruder. He didn't just play differently, he was different. And the fraternity wasn't going to let that slide. The dressing down. The breaking point came in a locker room in New Orleans. A group of officials and players cornered him. They didn't pull him aside to talk about his swing. They pulled him aside to tear him down. They told him he was a clown. They told him his clothes were shoddy and his behavior was unprofessional. They mocked him for refusing to use a caddy. Moe preferred to carry his own bag because he didn't want to force a stranger to deal with his eccentricities. Reportedly, even legends like Arnold Palmer were part of the group that suggested Moe wasn't a fit for the tour. Imagine being a man who struggled to even look people in the eye, being screamed at by your idols. They weren't just criticizing his golf. They were criticizing his soul. Moe didn't fight back. He didn't argue. He simply retreated. That night, he vowed never to return to the USPGA Tour. He turned his car north and drove all the way back to Ontario, leaving behind millions of dollars and a chance at global immortality. He chose the safety of the Canadian woods over the cruelty of the American spotlight. The ghost in the parking lot. This was the downfall, though it didn't look like a typical failure. Moe kept winning in Canada. He won over 50 titles. He shot 59s. He broke course records. But he was doing it for peanuts. He became a nomad. Because of his social anxiety and his fear of rules, Moe became a ghost. He lived out of his car, keeping all his possessions in the trunk. He would sleep in sand traps or in the parking lots of the courses he was about to dominate. He had no house, no family, and no bank account. The world called him a savant. But the truth was more painful. Moe was likely autistic in an era where that word didn't exist in the public vocabulary. To the crowds, he was a spectacle. To the kids who bullied him and threw pebbles at him during his backswing, he was a target. The man who Sam Snead called the greatest ball striker in history was broke. He was winning tournaments and then giving the prize money away to people he thought needed it more, or simply losing it because he didn't understand how to manage a life. The loneliest genius. By the 1970s, Moe Norman had become a myth, a what-if whispered by the pros who remembered the sound of his driver. But for Moe, the struggle was daily. He was a man who owned the physics of a golf ball but couldn't navigate the physics of a conversation. He had been bullied out of his own greatness. He had been told he was a freak so many times that he began to believe it. He hid his genius away in the small towns of Ontario, playing for $50 bets and a ham sandwich, while men with half his talent were becoming millionaires on television. He was a king in exile, a man who could hit a target from 200 yards away, but who was ultimately brought down by the one thing he couldn't control, the judgment of men who were afraid of what they didn't understand. The pipeline was still there. The swing was still perfect. But the man behind it was fading into the shadows of a world that had turned its back on its most gifted child. The redemption of the pipeline. For nearly 30 years, Moe Norman was the best-kept secret in sports. He was a man living on the fringes, surviving on $5 clinics and the charity of local Canadian pros. He was a ghost haunting the driving ranges of Ontario. But in 1995, the ghost was finally summoned home. Wally Uline, the CEO of Titleist, had heard the stories. He had seen the grainy footage of the man who never missed a fairway. And he did something that no one in the gentleman's fraternity had ever done for Moe. He offered him a contract for life. $5,000 a month every month, for as long as he lived, not for what he could do, but for who he was. The Master's return. The final decade of Moe's life was his true golden era. Suddenly, the man who had been mocked for his stutter was being sought out by the greatest players in the world. Tiger Woods, Nick Faldo, and Vijay Singh, the titans of the modern game, began to speak his name with reverence. They didn't see a freak anymore. They saw a master. They saw the only man who had ever truly solved the puzzle of the golf swing. Moe spent his final years traveling the world, showing anyone who would listen how to trap the ball. He wasn't hiding under porches anymore. He was the center of the universe. He finally had the money he deserved, and he spent it the only way he knew how, giving it away to people in need and buying hundreds of Cokes for his fans. The final fairway. On September 4, 2004, the pipeline finally stopped. Moe Norman passed away at the age of 75, just a few miles from the hills where he used to sled as a boy. He never won a green jacket. He never held a U.S. Open trophy. He never had the career that his talent dictated he should have had. But maybe Moe didn't need those things. He once said, "I don't want to be a legend. I just want to be a guy who hits it straight." In a world that obsesses over fitting in, Moe Norman was the ultimate outlier. He was a man who was bullied, shamed, and cast out. Yet he never changed a single thing about himself to please the crowd. He stood his ground, he kept his grip, and he proved that you don't have to look like a champion to be the greatest to ever play the game. He was the Rain Man of golf. But he was also something much simpler. He was a human being who found his own peace in a straight line. Moe Norman spent his whole life being told he was doing it the wrong way, only to leave the world realizing he was the only one who ever truly got it right.